Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
This session we are going to actually do as a team. The two of us are going to join together and present on the need to prepare ourselves for a smooth transition into GST. Mr. Nitin Mishra presented beautifully about GSTN, and I think after that session, there is no need for me to reiterate on the importance of preparing ourselves for GST. And needless to say, Benjamin Franklin said, by failing to prepare, we prepare to fail. And this is applicable where a smooth transition to GST calls for a lot of preparation. From the country side, from the tax authority side, and from the organization side, we see that the government and the tax department has worked far ahead, and it's going to be completely technology based, and the technology is developed, and we saw how beautifully it's structured, and it's meant to be easy for the taxpayers. Now as taxpayers, we need to be prepared to match that level. Today I think that we are all not geared for meeting the kind of the simplicity they are bringing in the GST. So with that in mind, we are covering as to what is going to be the things that we need to do for the purpose of getting ready for transition into GST. The moment you say prepare, you need to know the why, the who, and the how of it. Why is preparation required? How are we going to do it? And who is going to do it? That is what we are going to cover here. We are setting the context and saying what is the approach at the organization level, the function level, and again emphasize on the preparation.
So we have all been listening to GST. So what is GST? We have all heard about various definitions. Is it a tax or is it a reform? We are all very sure now, after hearing to all the dignitaries on stage, that it is a reform. When it is going to be a country-wide reform, it is not a surprise that it is going to be a reform for the business in total. The next question we are posing to you is, do the whole organization need to involve, or is it only the tax team to be involved in the training and knowledge development? It is a no. It is not a work for the tax team alone. The entire business has to know about the basics of GST, and they have to gear towards the changes required. We will throw a small question to you. We can just go back in time and think of one major event which has shaken the whole organization in the recent past. If you can think, it has been the Y2K. The one activity in recent history which we can think of as Y2K, when the entire business was involved in structuring IT-based transactions in all businesses. Most of us would have undergone the experience.
So, having set the context that this is going to be an activity which is going to involve every function in the organization, let's now go into the steps that needs to be taken for the purpose of getting ready for GSTN. Everyone from the organization will know that anything that you need to start, there are so many steps: prepare, execute, review, and then improve. We are covering the preparation stage now, and the first step for anything is you need to understand what it is about. Without knowing what it is, there is not going to be much impact in terms of going to the next step. So the organization, the business owners and the promoters and the senior management will have to first understand what are the important provisions of GST. There are so many sessions that are being conducted, there are so many articles that are being issued. Everywhere we turn around, we hear GST going on, discussion about GST going on now. Understanding the important provisions will help the organization to know what is it that they need to do, how does it impact them. Every individual has our own business and our own way of doing business, so understanding how it affects us is the most important part of it.
Is it not only the CEO or the head of business knows about GST? I don't think so. All the key managerial personnel in the company who are literally heading certain functions, all businesses have got functional heads. I literally feel that all key managerial personnel to go in depth and understand the new tax regime, because this is a business reform which I mentioned in the previous slide, which means that respective functional heads will be able to throw cost and benefit about their functions, and they will be able to recommend business decisions to the head or the CEO.
Now, once that the business heads and the functional heads are aware of what GST is all about and what are the important provisions and how it is going to affect, the next step becomes the impact study. How is it going to affect all the various activities that are there in the organization, and how is GST going to affect? This calls for creating a task force as a team depending upon the organization, wherein one person who has an extensive knowledge of GST gets involved, and every individual department also gets involved and have a representation in this, and they study and understand how is it going to affect them.
Once the impact study is done, the business gets a report on action points to be undertaken to become aligned with the requirements of the GST. Based on this, the business owner along with his team needs to sit and list out the action points and timelines for achievement and compliance with the required action points. This actually leads to IT development and infrastructure development, IT-based infrastructure.
Then comes training all the team members in the organization, telling them what GST is all about and telling them how their specific work is going to be altered. And last but not the least, it's not just the employees, it's the other stakeholders, the business partners and channel partners who also needs to be educated. Because GST, and as we saw, the buyer and the seller information gets captured and utilized in the same network. So it becomes imperative that we educate our business partners and channel partners and get them also into the GST network.
Is it enough if we talk about this overall change? Don't we think, look, is it not necessary to know the functional level action plans which is required to be done? We would like to go in depth into the functional level action points now. First, let me talk about the accounts team. Most of us here are aware that accounts team is responsible for in-depth data management. Like we saw in the previous presentation also, data management becomes key in GST regime. The master maintenance, where the vendor codes, vendor-related invoices have to be maintained, is very important. All the reconciliations, now GST requires reconciliation with all the vendors and with the financial accounts. This also becomes very imperative. All this implies accuracy in accounting. Only if the account is accurate, so there's a bit of compliance can be done with the GST requirements.
In other words, the GST network where we are going to post our tax related information calls for information to be captured at transaction level, and the accuracy at which the seller captures the information is what allows the buyer to take credit. If there is going to be an error in the information captured by the seller, automatically the buyer will be upset. Vice versa. So every organization is both the seller and the buyer, and it's most important that information gets captured accurately. And here what we are saying is we need to improve our accounting to a Japanese level of accounting, which is more than 100% perfect and accurate, and all information gets captured properly and accurately. The next, of course, is the procurement. When it comes to procurement, see, this is where the responsibility of ensuring that all our suppliers also do have their GST registration number. Till now, we were not very particular about registration of our vendors. If they are registered and they give us a tax invoice, we take credit. If they are not registered, we still negotiate and say, okay, we are fine. Let's see, as long as it goes, because there were also issues where we were not getting input credit for all transactions. So it was not that big a deal. Now with input credit becoming one of the most important pillars of GSTM, it's important that we educate our vendors and ensure that they register for GST and we get the input credit. It becomes price competitive and only the non-tax portion becomes an expense in our book. So renegotiation has to happen with all the vendors, wherein we go back and tell them, please get registered for GST and take benefit from all the tax part of your suppliers and pass it on to us. So there is a scope for renegotiation where the procurement team will have to be trained about the importance of GST and to negotiate with all the vendors. The next is again documentation. There might be, organization will have to think of creating a KYC for collecting information from the vendor. All the future vendors, there will have to be a format where you say, basically give your GST and registration number, your certificate, give us your PAN number and all those things. But for all the existing vendors that we have in our system, we'll have to go and collect the GST number and update this record. So this is one area where the procurement department will have to get involved extensively and start collecting that information and updating the master. Once the updation happens, there is also an extensive training required to the vendors, where every organization take the responsibility to train their partners and ensure that they understand the importance of registering for GST and how they in turn tell their suppliers to register for GST. The purpose of cascading effect is only when everybody in that network gets registered for GST and takes the input credit. We do not have that. The moment the chain gets broken, the issue will be that the tax benefit is it's not just on the value add that the tax happens, it's on the whole component that the repeat taxation happens.
Here, in another forum, I heard that Maruti Udyog Limited has already revisited their costing up to 4 level vendors. So that's a valid input that people are working around us in the country. I would like to speak about the supply chain distribution. We are all aware in GST that state borders are eliminated. So certain things become very, very significant, as in warehouses. All businesses need to take a relook at the warehouse maintenance, whether they need so many number of warehouses. Gentlemen, in the morning, Meera mentioned that warehouses can be converted into malls. Maybe business houses will consider that. What happens to the inventory levels when there is no check post, the documentation are simple? The inventory levels are bound to reduce and it will have a direct financial impact on the businesses.
See, when there are no check posts, if it takes 8 days for a truck to reach from one place to another, from north to south, I heard few of the people in logistics saying that it might take 2 days. We do not know whether it's 2 days or 8 days,
30% of the time is taken on check posts. So
it will reduce by 30%. So to that extent, it means that the inventory carrying, your inventory carrying time gets reduced and inventory level gets reduced, which means there's a financial impact in terms of if this can be reviewed on the raw material levels and the finished good levels can be reduced, and entire business plan for procurement has to be reworked. Now, once the supply chain distribution is reworked, the production also undergoes a change. The moment we say that there is no need for carrying that level of inventory, the inventory level can get reduced by probably 25 to 35% depending upon how the business looks at its model. The entire production cycle will have to go through a change in order to take the advantages.
Sales and marketing teams who directly interact with the channel partners, they need to understand GST. They should be aware of completely what will be the impact of GST on the pricing. They have to build awareness to all the people they interact with. Because if there is a problem in the invoice, then we cannot upload it in the GST and there will be a loss of credit and there will be a lot of time lapse in reconciliation and getting the refund.
It is also important for the sales team to tell their channel partners, the distributors and the retailers to register for GST and capture the 10 input credit for all the tax. Say, for some industry it might be possible that instead of 12.5% or 14.5%, they may fall in the 18%. The immediate reaction from the distributors would be that there is an increase. Will you look at reducing the price? Now, educating them to say that capture all these information, invoice, get registered for GST and invoice your customers and take credit for the tax invoice that we are doing. makes a whole lot of difference, and hence the training to the sales executives, the sales team of the organization and the channel partners becomes imperative. And of course, the organization will have to revisit the pricing as well, where if input credit is taken throughout and there's going to be a reduction in the cost, it can be passed on to the customer and advantage can be taken in being competitive in the market.
So now HR is another major function in all the businesses. HR will take a major role in training, in taking responsibility that all employees at all levels get proper training in GST and they are up to date with the Act.
Last but not the least comes IT. We kept IT in the end in order to ensure that we give more importance and stress to this. I started with saying government has reached far ahead and we have the complete infrastructure. I was actually amazed to see the presentation and seeing how simple and easy it is. We were all worried, like, what happens if the supplier makes a mistake and I'm not able to take input credit. When will I get to know that there is a mismatch and all? It's explained beautifully that, you will get input credit once he files the return. Now, it's important then for the organization to keep reconciling. We will have a system which would say that, these are all the invoices for which I am eligible for input credit. But when I go into the system and look into the, the return form 2, I'll find that only 50% is there or 80% is there. My supplier makes a mistake in filling my GST number wrong, it may go on to somebody else. If my supplier has not paid his tax, he has not filed it, I may not get it. The value might be wrong. Now, when the value is wrong, it can be rectified. When my GST number is wrongly captured or he has not filed his return, we will need to go back and then follow up with the supplier to file that return, which means there will have to be a reconciliation that should happen between our input tax credit report and the GSTN report. So there is a whole lot of effort, which means we should also capture the information correctly. So when it comes to IT, we are talking about 4 steps. The first step is software. Most of the software providers, the ERP providers are already aligning with the GSTN and they will be giving patch or they will be giving the updates. It then becomes important for us to take those updates and also change our internal processes to adapt to those changes, updates that are there that are going to come to us. And then alignment of the business specific changes, the processes changes that we will be doing through the impact study should also happen. All the masters will have to be updated, the vendor master and the customer master. The GST numbers will have to be captured. While GST is state level registration is called for, I can just think of one instance. What happens when we have a vendor who is present in more than one state? Then I will have to capture both his GST registration number and ensure that I have the value correct, so that when we compare the GST register from the system with our registers, input tax register, and there is a mismatch, it becomes easier for us to follow up with the supplier. Last but not the least is the reports that we require from the IT system. It's not just the ERP being updated to take advantages of the GSTN or to map with GSTN. It is also important that the organization raises itself to the level of being as tech savvy as the government where GST is concerned, and ensuring that we do not put in too much time and effort in having a large tax department in the organization. If you see today, the tax department in each of the organization would be as big as the number of taxes that are involved there. There would certainly be an excise, a tax at a person being taking care of the excise, one for direct taxation, one person if there is service tax specializing in that, and then you will have for each of the state a person taking care of, or each of the branches a person in charge of VAT, and then consultants in each of the states for VAT. From that, it would be easier and have a very skeleton tax system which is robust. But that would be possible only if we are going to have a technology at par with the GSTN. And if that is not there, we will have even larger tax department and more consultants, which would certainly be an opportunity for us. But having said that, we are not looking at an opportunity from that perspective. So with this, we are reiterating the need for So as a business, all this means that we understand the challenges, review the business processes, align the processes, and we will end up changing our business plan. Post GST, our entire planning will change and our finance plan and the budgets will have to also go through a change. With this, we are going to the last slide.
Yeah. So we need to start today. We have 5 months, and this 5 months will fly like 5 hours. I would like to 4 months, so 4 hours. Abraham Lincoln's quotation is, give me 6 hours to chop a tree, and I will spend the first 4 hours sharpening the axe. So are we ready to sharpen our axe? With this question, we end the session. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.